My name's Teresa Sharp. I work for Evolution Foundation, and I am a part of the Children's Behavioral Health Network, which is the organization that is putting on the Navigating the Storms retreat for you guys these last, yesterday and today. We are going to get started, and we have Jeremy Elledge here with New View Healing Solution, and he is going to talk to us today about family and generational trauma, and I will turn it over to him. Can't hear you, Jeremy. No.
I accidentally muted myself.
There you go.
And that's certainly not. And you know, I've been sitting over here making smart aleck comments the whole time that you guys have not been privy to. So, welcome. Thank you for that introduction, Miss Teresa. I am glad to be here. I hope you guys are enjoying your conference. I'll tell you guys just a hair about who I am. And one thing, I am the owner and founder of New View Healing Solutions, but I also want to mention too, I'm also a member of the Evolution Foundation, and I'm always so proud to be a part of this, state-changing group. And so I'm a member of the Evolution Foundation, and I'm also a full-time therapist and clinician with the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, ODMH. I work in Norman, and that's where I'm coming to you from today. But anyway, welcome, and I hope you guys are enjoying the conference. I'm going to tell you guys some things. I have a two-part kind of presentation that I'm going to give today. So the first part, we're going to talk about family and generational trauma, kind of the problem, and then I think more in the as we get into the second presentation, I want to talk a little bit more about what we can do about that. So, but this is totally in keeping with the new. So I'll tell you about our organization just a little bit. Like I said, I'm proud to be a social worker. Hello to all my fellow social workers and other mental health professionals, case managers, LPCs, all you guys. I appreciate you guys for what you do. But I'm a practicing therapist, but I was also part of one of the first trauma grants in Oklahoma some years back, and I didn't write the grant. I just kind of stumbled into an opportunity to work with it. And so, but we measurably improved outcomes in a few different facilities where we were able to work. And so it was really cutting edge stuff, and I was fresh out of school, so all learning was new learning to me at the time, but it was kind of a life changer. I learned a lot about trauma, and I've been kind of studying it ever since. But the grant ended, and so it was obviously a time and resource limited thing, then it went away, and the needs of our state remained great. And so I started this organization. Oklahoma is #1 in the nation for ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and I think most of you guys who are viewing today are probably Oklahomans, fellow Okies. And so we've heard all these first and worst facts, and it's embarrassing. We all agree. So we decided that we're going to do something about it. This is our something, and we appreciate your something, because I think a lot of people kind of recognize that there are a lot of problems in our world and in our state, but I think a lot are just kind of like, yeah, what are you going to do? Well, like I said, we say something and you say something, and we appreciate that. We're glad to be with you today. But we started this organization. We're an educational resource organization. We've branched out. We started to do a little bit of therapy, and we're starting a parenting class. So, but we started by providing continuing education for mental health professionals, and we've been doing that for almost 5 years now. And we want to make trauma training that's real, affordable, and accessible. I think we've all sat through mind-numbing trainings before that were just like, we have to sit here long enough so we can check the box and meet the mandate and get the CEU or whatever else. But I think when we forget to make training that's real, that helps people help people, then we're really missing an opportunity. And so we wanted to contribute our answers to that. We don't have all the answers, but we have some of them. And so we started this, and so we started going into rural communities. I'm from a rural community in the northeastern part of the state, and we didn't have great training coming through Nowata, Oklahoma. And so we had to go to Tulsa or Oklahoma City or one of the universities, but the needs of our state are great throughout. And so in such an injured state, we need to be giving away, trauma training and good information on every street corner. And so that's why we do what we do. We appreciate all the clinicians who support us and get their very affordable CEUs with us, but that makes it free to the larger community. Because if we're going to change Oklahoma ACEs, it's certainly going to require more than just the helping professionals. Every safe adult really does have a stake in this, and we need to get everybody aware and involved of how they can help change Oklahoma, make Oklahoma safer and healthier for kids. Because again, if it's just left to us, we're going to lose this battle. We are losing this battle, despite all of our best efforts, I think. And so anyway, but one of the things we want you guys to help us spread the word about is that we do free training to all police departments in all school districts in Oklahoma. We will come and spend a day with those folks, and we don't ask $1. Our mission is to make a difference, not $1, and we certainly want to support our Oklahoma systems of care that really do need some care. So if have friends and colleagues in those disciplines, and you find what we're talking about helpful, please let them know, because we had an event recently where we had about 2 or 3 officers signed up, and it was kind of deflating because we feel like we got some good stuff. So anyway, check us out, newviewhealingsolutions.org, and if you would like to follow us, yes, you can do that. You can send us an email if you want a copy of today's presentation, or if you'd like to get our quarterly newsletters that let you guys know about our events. So anyway, that's us. Check us out, info@newviewhealingsolutions.org. So, and I want to introduce my assistant today, William White. He's a social worker and great friend to me. Known this guy for years. He's a brother, member of the organization, going to be licensed soon and going to be doing more training with us. He's my eyes today and my technology. I'm not good with technology. And for some of you who might know me, I'm vision impaired. So I've lost most of my vision over the past, I used to say decade, but it's getting longer than that now. But I have retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. So that's another interesting story I'll tell you another time. But anyway, but if there is anything good about having a vision impaired presenter, is that I will not be reading you my PowerPoints. I want to talk with you today, and I'm going to be trying to check in, and remember to check in with the messenger board regularly, so I can respond to your comments and questions, as long as you don't want to throw too many rocks. So anyway, thank you, Will. Thank you, Evolution Foundation. Teresa, let's get going. What's the first slide? Some interesting history? Okay, so in the United States of America, we haven't always understood trauma, and I think maybe now we're just starting to. But our first understanding of trauma was that of the soldier, the veteran, the person who'd gone off to war and been in battle, and most of the time that was men. And of course, battle, that's noble, going and fighting for your country and being manly, that's trauma you could talk about, if you notice. But there are certainly other types of experiences that result in traumatic impacts and traumatic injuries, but we didn't understand that very well. And so it was the experience of some other populations that kind of shed some light and helped us understand a little bit better. So I will tell you guys, I'm not used to presenting in 1 hour. I usually present a little bit longer, and I'm not complaining, but I'll probably talk fast because I want to try to get to a lot of good information today. But quick question though, for you guys that are going to be responding on messages or comments. Do you guys know how we prosecuted the first case of child abuse in the United States of America? Because once upon a time, it wasn't illegal to beat the crap out of your kids or to hurt them real bad, to lock them up, to restrain, to do a lot of different heinous things that we know today is very harmful to the developing human. Do you guys know how we prosecuted that? It wasn't child protection law, just a hint. Does anyone have any comments or responses for us on that? Will? No, okay. Well,
let's do it in the morning.
it's not that early. But pardon my water bottle, it sounds like a dolphin. But anyway, it was actually under animal protection law. We protected animals that we either were going to work to death or eat or like keep as a pet, I guess. We protected those creatures more than before we protected children. And of course now today that seems wild to really think about. But there was a case of child abuse so heinous that a neighbor or a citizen observed something and said, "That's terrible, I'm calling the police." And the police came out and said, "Well, there's nothing on the books that says they can't do that." But we agree that's wrong, that's immoral. And so they looked up the nearest law they could find, which was animal protection law. And so they prosecuted under that. And as that happened, they started to see a need to start to protect children, because children can't protect themselves. And so let me ask you guys another trivia question. The rule of thumb, and can tell us what that means. Rule of thumb, ladies, gentlemen, anyone. Do we got responses on that? Quick fingers? No responses. People are not feeling like interacting today. It's okay. I got an answer.
The rule of thumb, from my understanding, was back in the day that men couldn't beat their wives with anything wider than their thumb.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, she wins the point there on that terrible, tragic fact. And it wasn't a law, but it was a legal precedent, and that actually went through a courtroom. And make no mistake about it, folks, it wasn't really about humane concern for the ladies. Women were very much caretakers, and they took care of the children in the home and their husbands, and so it was an inconvenience for you ladies to be incapacitated or dead. So we wanted to protect you guys at least enough so you'd keep up the house and the kids and all the stuff that you were dependent on heavily. And again, a judge did say no wider than your fingers. So again, you had to hope your guy had skinny fingers because it was going to be acceptable. It was going to be acceptable that you're harmed in your home. Even with the rule of thumb and laws that started to prohibit domestic violence in its different forms, then we started to see data that we wasn't seeing before, data that wasn't tracked, because women and children were being harmed, of course, but no one cared. If you went to the county officer and said, "Please help me, I'm being harmed in my home," you were kicked back into your community, and often by an annoyed good old boy sheriff who didn't want to bother with it. That was family business, and it was to stay in the family. War, you could talk about them kind of injuries, but the things that behind closed doors, you didn't want to talk about it. And we know now trauma is out there in the world. It's a traumatic, scary world, but it does a special kind of harm to us when we're injured in our home, in our safe place. And so one of the things, I talk a lot about is the neurological and the physiological response to trauma. Pain sends a signal through our body. If you touch something that's hot, a signal goes at over 1,000 miles per second through your nervous system to let your brain know as quickly as possible, you are injuring yourself, don't do this. And so you pull away without thought, without reaction. Now, but of course, a lot of kids growing up in a state like Oklahoma, we grow up with our hand on the burner, and you can't pull away till 18 years or so. So it's caused a lot of generational trauma and a lot of maladaptive development. And so, and of course, I've got another training that I do on marginalized populations. We know that we're a country founded on racism. A lot of people get their feelings hurt about that. Now, none of us were there. But they quoted the Bible to say that we could take all the land from the Indians and that we could enslave and own human beings in the African race. And we had a whole sect of our country that was trying to start their own country on that, on that premise. And so we have regressed as a nation, of course, but while some families have generated wealth, while the families who owned slaves and kicked Indians off of their land are doing great today, generationally speaking and economically speaking. Many of those marginalized populations struggle to this day. So generational trauma is a very real thing, and it's a measurable thing, and we're going to talk some about those injuries today. So anyway, I hope I haven't lost anyone yet, Will. But anyway, what is trauma? So I think it's first important for us to understand what trauma is and what trauma does to us. Now, some people talk, us therapist types, we talk about feelings in terms of kumbayas and lighting candles and holding hands and, smelling. I don't know. I'm thinking about the neuroscience of this. And so emotions are made of electrical impulses and neurochemicals. And so there's no such thing as a bad or a wrong emotion. But if we do experience our own physiological response to a stressor or a painful event, then it does leave a lasting impression on our brain and on our body. And that's measurable. That's measurable. And I think that that's really, really important for us to understand, because injured people do injured things. We can see a lot of physiological symptoms from trauma now. We can see that it changes our brain, that it changes our heart, that it changes our nervous system in these measurable ways. And if something hurts my body and changes the way it works, and that's an injury, but we don't see the injury a lot of times first. We're reacting to the injured person, because injured people do injured things, and they sometimes provoke some pretty strong emotions from those around. That's one of the things. Injured kids grow up injured, doing injured things, and then they're punished, they're judged, they're criticized, they're shamed, and they're adapted to their injuries. They get used to having their needs go unmet. So I think it's really important for us to, what do I get? Am I talking about the right slide, Will?
Yeah, well, now we're on the injury of trauma.
Did I talk about the right stuff on that last one?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We haven't talked about chronic stress.
Okay, I didn't talk. It was chronic stress on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, one of the things I think it is really important for us to think about. Now, trauma is a noticeable thing. If you got hurt and then some things changed for you, emotionally, cognitively, physically after that event, then we can kind of connect the dots. But when traumas are repeated early and often, we see something called complex trauma. And so that's not so easy to cognitive behaviorally therapize out of to connect all the dots and know where it comes from and why and all of that, especially when trauma has become normalized. There's this kid, I've told a lot of you guys, I always remember him. I was doing these trauma assessments on every kid that came through the children's hospital. And he said, "What's trauma?" And I tried my best to tell him what it was. And he said, "I don't got any of that, and I ain't talking to you about it." And I said, "Okay, well, that's fine. We don't have to talk. We don't have to talk about it." And then he started worrying if he was going to get in trouble. He said, "Oh, well, am I going to get a refuse? Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to get on level? All this stuff." I said, "Well, no, man. A term I often use is, I'm not a dentist and I don't pull teeth. If you don't want to tell me, I don't want to know." So he told me everything. And so, and he had trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And so he had what we would call complex PTSD. So it wasn't so easy to connect the dots, because he doesn't remember a point when everything changed, because it was always constantly chaotic and painful. Now, chronic stress is different, because we can be really intensely focused or worried or just involved in intense work or intense family situations or conflicts that don't necessarily involve us being hurt in an immediate way, but in a more gradual way. Now, I think trauma, is bad enough. Now, chronic stress has very similar impacts on brain and body, and yet less noticeable, and it kind of creeps up on you. Excuse me. I think I'm still just kind of getting my voice back. I'd kind of lost it a little bit last week. So did I tell them good about chronic stress, Will? All right.
So we're going to go on to the injury of trauma.
Okay. So this is about the different impacts.
Yeah, changes in heart function.
Okay. So we can measure a person's heart even in their sleep. and see that they've been impacted by stress. The traumatized or chronically stressed person has more resting heartbeats per minute, and that's in the state when your body's supposed to be most calm. So another example of a physical injury. Let's think about it in terms of our respiration. Our breathing is more rapid and shallow in the resting state, also in the sleep study comparison. And I feel like, to me, that is what I would term biologically or physiologically ironic, because when you're needing relaxation, you require larger volumes of oxygen, and your tendency when injured is to give yourself less. And so consciousness and awareness for that part of the injury helps us kind of take some steps to do something about that. We can even look at brain activity in REM sleep and see that we have less REM activity and less of those really restorative cycles of healing sleep that we need every night. Our body, has wear and tear every day, and it comes into contact with bugs and germs and viruses. And so without sleep, we are more susceptible to big and little illnesses, big and little injuries. We get old faster and we die quicker without sleep. So those are some pretty significant impacts of the injury of trauma. We see when kids are harmed badly before age 7, it affects their overall height. They're shorter as adults. We see that when trauma is significant before age 7, we see that it affects pubic development, often causing girls to hit puberty earlier and boys later. And we don't always know why that is. But some have speculated that it's about the body's needing to prioritize for which need is okay to address or to experience at that moment. So if anyone's ever been hungry and then you got stressed out and you're distracted and you lost your appetite, your body decided in that moment subconsciously to prioritize for a different need. And so a lot of times what is happening in children's bodies, they're being forced to prioritize for which development is safe. So anyway, a lot of different real and measurable impacts of trauma, and injured people do injured things. Did we show them the brain scans? Did I have that, Will? Or is that in the
Next slide.
That's the next slide. When I was an injured kid, I was a delinquent kid. I was in trouble all a bunch, and everything. I didn't realize that I was injured. It was a pretty normalized injury in a state like Oklahoma. A lot of us grew up this way. One of my injuries, I got hit by a truck on my motorcycle when I was a kid, when I could still see well enough to do such things. And I got splattered all over Elm Street in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. I had bones poking out of me. And the doctor said I'd be hard to live with for a while, since I was fortunate to live through my injuries, but I had some serious ones. And so I was immobilized. I was in a lot of pain. And after all the visitors died down, I was pretty isolated. And so I did feel bad, and I probably lashed out some. And my family, for the most part, was patient with me about it. You can't beat a kid with a big cast on, But my injuries were obvious. They were on the outside of my body. You can look at those brain scans there, and we do a comparison. I didn't do that, research. Those are people that are qualified to scan your brain and tell you about it. But again, we see a brain that has relatively low, trauma or chronic stress, and then you see brains that do, and it's different. It's absolutely different. Our brain is what's called use dependent, and so our brain grows and develops based on how it's used and how it's activated. And of course, that's happening most rapidly in the first 5 to 7 years of life, we know. So again, we need a well-rounded set of experiences so all of our capacities develop appropriately. But a lot of people are growing up with too much activity in one part of their limbic system. Their stress response is being activated too often or too intensely. The pain response, the loss response, the fear response. The shame response is being activated too often. And so it's like a muscle. It grows. It literally becomes more developed. And we could scan someone's brain now, like I said, and see that. But kids don't walk around with brain scanners and heart monitors. They say mean things to each other and to you. And they provoke some pretty strong feelings. And so one of our missions is to make Oklahoma safer and healthier for kids, especially those injured kids that can provoke punishment and punitive and reactive and harmful responses from those who really need patience from. So we've got to really understand the injuries of trauma so we don't punish them for being injured. So did I cover that, Will?
Yeah, you did.
All right.
We're going on generational.
Generational trauma. So trauma can be generational as given the title of the presentation, but that happens in a number of different ways. You know, when a human being is traumatized and then they grow up traumatized, if they have children, they often, you know, they've lived a lot of their life in injured ways, and so they parent injured. The presentation that I'm going to give this afternoon is called Healing Injured Parenting. And that one's important because, well, it's a part of a program that we're starting because we need to help parents understand how to stop these cycles. And, you know, us therapists, we're expected to be miracle workers. Here, you know, here's a kid with 15 years worth of pain, fix them in an hour a week. No, we've got to empower families. And so, but as far as generational trauma, this is both a direct and a vicarious injury because it hurts us to see our loved ones hurting and being injured and living in you know, destructive, maladaptive patterns. But again, parents who are injured parent injured. And so there is a lot of firsthand and direct trauma and abuse and neglectful patterns that are passed from generation to generation. And so this is about nature and nurture. And we can even see through some studies of epigenetics that DNA is not, you know, it is what it is. You know, our genetic components that come from our our genetic contributors, you know, that's set in stone. And yet the way that many traits manifest is absolutely influenced by environment. And so a lot of illness, you know, is developed and created because of generational trauma. And so, and one of the things that I think that we see with generational trauma is it becomes a normalized thing. You know, you get hit by a car and, oh my God, this terrible thing just happened. But what if the terrible thing's every day, all the time, and it's not so you know, it's not so rare or out of the ordinary. So it's like, I got hit by a car again. What else is new? You know, what if that was the norm? Because a lot of families being hurt, you know, and hurting one another has become quite normalized. And so, and, you know, I think that we really have to guard the familiarities of our children. That's one of the things, you know, our brains are developing most rapidly again in the first 5 to 7 years of life, and our brain is sucking up data constantly. And so, and our brain doesn't have a goalkeeper that kicks out dysfunctional data and guards our brain against dysfunctional data. It takes it all in. And again, that's the data that we have to choose from later. And it's a subconscious choice. Now, one of the things, again, I'm going to depress you guys about the problem in the first half. And again, later on, we're going to talk about in a more hopeful way what we can do about this, because we do have the ability to influence the ongoing development of our brain based on what we do. So we can't rewind and erase trauma out of our own life or out of our family's life, but there is a lot that we can do about this. And that's what I'm really excited about in working with families and with kids and with my fellow clinicians. So questions, comments, anyone?
Someone was asking if there was a Spanish link available for translation, and I don't know.
I don't know if that, I believe that the presentation itself may have been translated into Espanol, but I am sorry if we do not have this. I would be super impressed with whoever could keep up with my jabbering anyway.
We do not have.
Was not. The Healing Injured Parents is going to be translated.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, see, that's they'll miss the stuff that's doom and gloom, and then they'll have the better stuff. No, the more hopeful stuff. But no, this is all important. I think we have to understand the problem and then how best to address it. So what's next, Will?
Family ACEs.
Okay. You guys are familiar with ACEs. And from what I understand, we probably have kind of a mixed audience. I'm guessing a lot of mental health professionals, child care workers, case managers, stuff like that, foster care, concerned members of the community from all walks of life. And so I've got a book that I've been writing for forever, and we're hoping to really knock it out maybe this next summer, but it's called ACEs, Injuries and Healing. And so ACEs, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, for those of you that are not familiar. And there was a study done, I'll just give you a real quick crash course in it, but there was a study done, it started in the 1990s, and it was done by the Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control, and they were actually not studying trauma. Can anyone tell us what they were actually looking at and addressing first when they stumbled onto some of this significant data? Anyone tell us? Okay, no answers. So I will go ahead and respond, and I will win the point. But no, they were actually studying weight and people who struggled with obesity and unhealthy eating patterns. And so a bunch of people who had these struggles went into the program, and they had good resources and supports and accountabilities and different things, and they lost weight and they got healthier. And then they graduated the program and celebrated, probably, I don't know. And then they left. And what do you guys think happened? They didn't have the support and everything. They didn't have the resources. And if you're guessing that they gained the weight back, you were right. Most of them gained the weight back, and some even kind of even more so, you know. And so they didn't really understand why that was at the time. And so they kind of asked as many of those people as possible to answer a battery of different questions, some really intrusive, psychological, intense questions. And the common denominator was they found identified 10 different types of childhood trauma, and all of them relate to injuries that happen in our home with our caregivers. And so, you know, kids, that's one of the things, you know, if you're a grown up and you're getting hurt at your job or in your relationship, you know, all kinds of funky reasons why people don't always get away from the pain, adaptation and necessity, whatever else, dysfunctional attachments. But kids don't have the resources, the development of brain or body. They can't reach the pedals. They don't have no money. They don't have no rights. They are stuck with their pain. They're absolutely stuck with it. And so ACEs, one of the significant things that we say, again, I'm going to depress you guys this morning. I'm going to tell you guys that the more ACEs, the more adverse childhood experiences you have in a time when you can't protect or defend or provide for yourself, the shorter your life is and the more miserable it is on the way to that. And that ain't right. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing as far as New View. That's why you're doing what you're doing. That's why you're here today. And we thank you for that. Because, you know, I get pretty pumped about this, and I'm not preaching at you. I think we're all singing the same song here. But let's break this thing down. Because when we look at family ACEs, when we look at these adverse childhood experiences, well, we look at the ACEs first. There was this pyramid. I didn't include it because I needed to make a short presentation, but there was this graphical representation of ACEs. On the bottom is the injuries, the ACEs. On the second level of the pyramid, you see maladaptive coping. Obsessive and compulsive and addictive behaviors are starting to be tried because injured people do injured things to try not to feel their injured feelings. And so kids, you know, are experimenting with cigarettes and vapes now, and, you know, and drugs and alcohol and, you know, marijuana and all kinds of different things, chemical, digital pleasures of every sort. And they're trying not to feel their feelings. And one of the things I think is really important for us to understand is in a capitalist society, if it can make a buck for somebody somewhere, we're going to let it happen. And so there's a lot of addictive traps for our kids, and people with more injuries, with more pain, are going to have a greater need for relief and therefore a greater risk for addiction. And so our brains were wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So if there's been more pain, guess what? We're going to gravitate to more pleasure and a lot of different avoidant mechanisms. People try not to think about it, feel it, remember it. So those are what we call maladaptive coping mechanisms. You know, and kids don't have the words or the development to say, you know, I'm just struggling with unresolved grief and loss issues and, you know, a lack of safe attachment in my home. You know, they don't tell us that. They act out and they do things that they get in trouble for. But a lot of those things are trying not to feel their injured feelings or the skills that they needed to navigate a very dysfunctional home environment. I like the way I said that, Will. Anyway.
It's all being recorded, so
Okay, well, very
play
good.
that.
All right. But anyway, but one of the things that I find most hopeful, you know, a lot of you guys have found your resilience. A lot of you guys are high ACE kids that grew up. So I challenge every one of us to continue to keep healing, to tackle any injured behaviors that we still may be engaging in. But let's break it down again, because as we work our way on up that pyramid, kids that are starting to experiment are by later adolescence and early adulthood, they've got habits now. You know, substance habits. They've often struggled to make it through school. If they did make it through school, they're kicked out and suspended in record numbers, the kids that need their schools the most. So anyway, they've got dysfunctional relationships. Kids that are injured find other kids to be injured with and do injured together. You know, negative peer groups, gangs, early sexual relationships, again, and these are all maladaptive coping and meeting needs, even dysfunctional in dysfunctional ways, but meeting real emotional needs. But one of the things, again, family and generational trauma and family ACEs, what it does is it lets us know that, yeah, it's just par for the course. Yeah, that's just what we do in this family. We're injured and it's time, it's your rite of passage. You know, a kid told me once, you know, that we was talking about his future, because one of the symptoms of trauma is having poor future orientation, poor ability to plan. And I asked him what he wanted to do when he grew up. He said he'd probably go to jail. And I've had a lot of kids tell me that. And I said, well, gosh, man, jail's terrible. Why would you want to do that? I said, I don't really want to. That's just what we do in my family. Dad, uncle, big brother, there's all there. What if everybody you look up to is waiting for you in the big house? You know, that kind of generational trauma has hit my brothers in my family and my nephews in my family. So you know, this kind of thing, it hits all of our families in some very personal ways. But again, it normalizes poor life outcomes, poor educational outcomes, poor health outcomes, regular substance habits, dysfunctional interactions between people who are attached and love one another. You know, this is what we do. This is what we do. But we can do something about it. You know, when we can get to kids and intervene early enough, and again, any safe adult can really be an important resiliency anchor for kids. And again, we're going to talk more about that this afternoon. But how am I doing on time, man? I know I have
11:10. So
when do I quit this thing? 11:30? Yeah, I think so. I think it's an hour.
Yes, 11:30.
Cool. Well, we're going to fill up all the time as usual, Miss Teresa. Okay, so what's next? Well, you know, if we're still talking about family ACEs, at the last of the pyramid, you know, by adulthood, we've got serious addictions, we've got chronic health problems, cancers, STDs, HIVs, you know, addictions, incarcerations, and early death because something that happened to us when we were a little kid. You know, when we did not choose our start in this world. And so that's one of the things I think, you know, this having a nice school district and a crappy school district and letting only my tax dollars take care of this. If we let any kids fail, we're all failing, you know. And so a sane and civilized society protects and serves all children. And so, and of course, you know, pledge allegiance to the flag, liberty and justice for all. We're not there yet. There is not liberty and justice for all. So anyway, but we can do something about it. And in the state that's #1 in ACEs, we better do something about it because we've got a ton of injured outcomes to show for it. And let's roll on some of those.
Impacts of generational trauma and dysfunctional norms.
Okay, so again, I think we've covered some of this. You know, what all's on that one, Will?
Dysfunctional norms, chronic family stressors, adaptation to high stressful conflict, inadequate resources, impacts to thinking and values, norms, beliefs, impacts to emotions and mental health, physical health.
Yeah, I think that we've covered all that. Okay, so let's.
Contributors to generational trauma.
Okay, well, people want to try to reenact their trauma. Sometimes they don't realize that they're always doing it. But think about it in terms of, you know, if you had some really terrible experiences and you figured out some skills that helped you survive that experience, you're going to want to draw on those experiences again and again and draw on those skills, sometimes quite subconsciously, sometimes quite instinctively. You know, if the worst problem you ever had was solved with a hammer, then guess what? The world's full of nails now, you know? And so I think about it in terms of, I had a family member served in Vietnam, and they talked about how they had to be on watch at the perimeter. And on perimeter, you're in the jungle and you have to be real quiet and you have to watch and listen real close for any movement, any sound, any twig snapping. That means you and your buddies are going to die. And so pretty intense stuff, right? Chronic stress, anybody? And so imagine being out there for 12 hours or so, you know, with your shoulders tense like this, being really on edge. And then you get to go back to a tent and you'd be relieved and say, all right, now let them shoulders down and go lay down and rest so you can go do it again. And so again, turning, you know, our body off when the stressor goes away isn't so easy, we know. And so, but they had alcohol available, they had marijuana, they had opium and heroin readily available to our servicemen and women. And so many, developed addictions because, again, if you try not to think about what you just saw in battle that day, or if you're just trying to get some sleep so you can get out there and stay awake for watch the next time, again, anything you can grab that'll work will work, you know, in a crisis type of situation. But again, the body remembers the relief, not the hangover, not the regret. And so, so there's lots of different forms of traumatic reenactment. People who have been abused in childhood often find abusive relationships, not because they want to be, because it's familiar. You know, people who have been in one domestic violence relationship, if long enough, statistically, they're likely to be in another one. People who have been sexually assaulted once or more are often much more likely to be victimized, additional times. And not because we crave abuse, not because the victim, deserved it or put themselves in bad situations. A lot of times we can't help the proximity to our abusers. But also it does harm to our sense of what is safe and who is safe. And so what is it? Learned helplessness?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I've talked about a lot of different mouse studies, and there's one of the studies where mice go through a maze and they're rewarded if they do well and they get shocked if they don't. And the more times they make mistakes, they get shocked. And the more times they get shocked, the more error prone they become. And then they start to develop mouse trauma. They have mouse ulcers, they get mouse PTSD, they really are visibly harmed. And so, and if a mouse is shocked enough, he wants out of his cage, right? He wants out, he wants out, he wants out. But if you shock him enough, you can open up the cage and he won't leave. And you see that with institutionalization, you see that in abusive relationships, we see that in an incarcerated state. You know, if your needs are left unmet long enough, some of those needs numb. And we adapt to dysfunctional environments. And so so learned helplessness, is almost kind of like accepting what's happened to us. And I don't know, It's definitely one of the long-term adaptations of being hurt over and over again. Did I cover that one, Will? What's next?
Pre-logic learning.
Okay. Again, I was telling you guys, our brains don't have a filter. And so, there's something, that I call pre-logic learning. Now, when we go to school and, they tell us why to conjugate into different things in English and, why to use different equations, because it makes sense according to some math guy. And, I wasn't real big into the intense math equations, but we learn a lot because it makes sense when it comes to those, complex concepts of learning. But when it comes to human interactions and human norms, human instincts, a lot of this is coming in at a very early time. We think a lot of how we think, talk how we talk, feel how we feel, and respond to an environment a lot of times because of things that wasn't of our choosing. You ever heard yourself talk like your mom or your dad or some guy in a show that you watch or something? Again, these words fall out of our mouths sometimes because, again, we learn from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone who learned from someone. And so a lot of the values and the instincts on how men and women are supposed to treat each other, pre-logic, how children are supposed to be treated, pre-logic. And so, what they used to have all these sayings about kids, you guys remember these children are to be seen and not heard, speak when spoken to, stuff like that, not really very respect, but these were norms, and again, you could beat the crap out of your kid too, and your wife, again, pre-logic. So now we got laws on the books now that say you can't beat your kid, can't beat your wife, can't, harm other races of people and discriminate. We've got rules on the books, but those problems haven't gone away in our society because a lot is still being handed down in the time where we're doing things because it's familiar, not because it makes sense. So I think it's really, so many kids are growing up with what I call detrimental familiarities, dysfunctional norms, and so, in fact, for my note takers, I got 3 notes for you right now. This is what we've got to keep addressing. The diagnosis, the diagnostic terms will keep changing, but human problems aren't changing that much. And so in your treatment plans, you'll keep addressing trauma and chronic stress in kids and families. You'll keep addressing unmet emotional needs, and you'll keep addressing those dysfunctional norms, those detrimental familiarities, those things that shouldn't be normal, but have become normal to so many of our little ones.
Someone is asking, what's the difference between learned helplessness and trauma bond? They sound the same.
Well, learned helplessness, I think it's kind of this, it's taking away our hope. The worst thing that you can do is take away our hope. Now, I think people can bond through different traumatic experiences because humans, if you hang out with somebody long enough, you start to kind of form some familiar attachments. That's why we see people who have been, the Stockholm syndrome. I would consider that more of a trauma bond. And of course, bonding to our captors in situations like that is certainly self-preservation. But again, I see it a little bit differently because learned helplessness is an adaptation over time that causes us to kind of not be able to see outside of the injury and the injured relationship or dynamic or pattern, where the trauma bond, again, there's a lot of different ways that people kind of trauma bond to one another. And people can, I've known people who went through a really terrible experience. They were both affected by the same loss. They developed maladaptive coping together, and then they drank and drugged together and commiserated and commemorated. Yeah, you could develop codependent, addictive patterns. So I would, that's another way that I would differentiate perhaps of a trauma bond. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, they said yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Good question.
So anyway, after pre-logic learning.
What's next?
Biological generational impacts. So
Okay, the mouse study. So, in thinking about generational trauma, we do a lot with mice, and we do that because their nervous systems are so very similar to ours. And so, and again, I'm not a huge proponent of jacking up little mice, but I don't care that much because we're still jacking up little humans. And so, when we protect all kids and all vulnerable populations, then we can start saving the lab animals too. We won't need them as much. But anyway, in this one study, they shocked male mice, and then they exposed while simultaneously exposing them to the cherry blossom smell. Shock 'em cherry, shock 'em cherry, shock 'em cherry. After a while, they had formed a traumatic association for the mouse. After a while, you didn't even have to let them smell, or you didn't have to shock them anymore. You just let them smell cherry, and they were afraid. Because mice can develop little mouse ulcers and noticeably fearful, injured behaviors. And so anyway, they had these injured little mice have mouse babies. And so, and they had up to 3 generations of mouse pups. And they found that now none of the mouse pups had ever been exposed to any kind of electrical shock. But up to 3 generations of pups were fearful, visibly scared of cherry blossom smell when they'd never experienced the actual injury itself. And so think about that. Because again, they were responding to a stimulus that had been encoded on their genes. They looked at the DNA of these little mice, no alteration. But through gene expression, environmental factors had absolutely affected how different traits had manifested. And so now think about that, though. Think about if a people have been harmed over generations by another type of people. And so, I do a presentation on, ethical considerations for working with marginalized populations. I've hear a lot of my white brothers and sisters say, but this group is racist against us, they say. No, there's a difference. Hypervigilance that's been formed over generations is different. How many? 8? We're doing all right. I think we're doing okay. So anyway, but for a lot of people in the United States of America, it's not a cherry blossom that they fear, but it may be something that's been harmful to their people over generations. And so one of the things that I think, if we're not willing to acknowledge the long-term impacts of generational trauma, then we contribute to it. What's the next slide?
Measurable generational trauma in Native American.
Okay, so I'm a part Cherokee, OCO, to my Cherokee brothers and sisters. It's not obvious. I'm a fractional amount, but I am on the rolls. And some of my ancestors did wrong by some of my other ancestors. We wasn't there. But no, Native Americans make up approximately 6% of Oklahoma's population. So that means Native American males make up even less than 6% of Oklahoma's population. And Native American males make up almost 25% of our suicide rate. Doesn't that boggle your mind? Such a small percentage of our population accounts for so many of our suicides. And so the thing, generationally speaking, Native American people were given these, less abundant, less fertile grounds, and put on reservations and made to suffer. Any people, any population without enough appropriate resources will struggle generationally. And one of the harms that we see, because the majority of Native American populations were decimated, were massacred, were killed. And so, but if you harm people over long enough periods of time, the adaptation is that they take over and do it to themselves, because we do see astronomical rates of murder, domestic violence, child abuse, addiction among our Native populations. And it's not because there's anything wrong with our Native brothers and sisters. There's more pain and more injury and less resource. And so we know we lock up more women, more mommies in Oklahoma than anywhere else in the world. And we lock up. We're number 2 in locking up men. We lock up more brown-skinned people for the same crimes and criminal backgrounds. There's a lot of real measurable impacts. Oklahoma is number 1 in ACEs in the nation. We're also number 1 in heart disease death. We're also, number 4 in cancer deaths. We're number 4 in divorce rate. We have a lot of worst and first facts, and we're number 46th in the nation for educational spending and mental health treatment spending for the kids, getting what we pay for. I don't get into the politics of it, but we've got to elect people who are for the kids and for the families. We've got to do that. Republicans or Democrats, we got to have more than cutting ribbons and saying nice things, because dollars and cents matter, and we've got to understand the injuries of trauma, because even with new money coming into our state, if we build nice new buildings and do the same old crap, we're going to, perpetuate this cycle. So what's next? Do I have a little time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay.
Attention, please.
Okay. Yeah. So there's all kinds of needs that people have, and paying attention to kids is just really, really important. It's one of the most key needs that they have. How much time we invest in kids is how they develop in their self-esteem and in their own brain's connective abilities. Our brain learns through experience, and we're social emotional creatures, so we need healthy human interactions. But kids are really needing our attention bad. And so I used to teach a parenting class with this lady. She was my co-facilitator. And I love the way she put this. She said, when your kids walk in the room, your eyes are supposed to light up. Kids are supposed to know that they're valued and they're special. We teach kids how to feel about themselves. And so our attention, the time that we spend with kids is going to be directly linked to their outcomes. And so it's absolutely necessary. And one of the things that we really want to do is empower the parent's role. Because again, as a clinician, I think I'm good at what I do. I hope to be a competent mental health professional, but I still got an hour or less with a kid per week. And so empowering the parental role means that we're going to acknowledge that they have the most influence on their kid, for better or for worse. And so the familial bond, there's so much power in that. So anyway, what's the last couple of bullets? Can I cover that?
Helping parents see the need, relationship building, strength of human connections, determine many life outcomes.
Yeah.
Valuing kids' interests, finding areas.
Oh yeah. So we got to value kids' interests too. I'm a dad myself. A lot of you guys are parents, I assume. And so, a 44-year-old man and a 17-year-old daughter don't always have a lot in common. And I think that it's easier for us to go where they are in their interests than it is for them to be interested in fantasy football or, whatever it is that we might enjoy. But there are interests, and our bonded we are, how attached we are with our kids and they to us, it really does determine a lot of really significant life outcomes. And it gives us a reason to stay young, to go to rock concerts and, sing at the top of our lungs with our kids, and to preserve a youthful outlook. I'm going to leave the remaining minute or two for questions or comments. And then it's my understanding that I'm going to be talking with you guys a bit more here in a little while. So I thank you guys for your attention, your questions, your comments, and I look forward to visiting more again this afternoon.
Wonderful, Jeremy. Does anybody have any questions? You can feel free to unmute or put it in the chat.
Yes, absolutely. And again, if anyone would like a copy of today's presentation, just shoot us an email. We'll gladly share that information with you. And one thing I will note is we've piled both of the presentations into one file. So if you want one, you're getting both. So, but feel free to shoot us an email, give us a call, and if anyone wants to follow us in what we're doing, our next big live event is in Lawton, Oklahoma on April the 24th. We're having a day of learning and fun at Cameron University.